All right, you're passing the turn. All right, cool. Untap, upkeep.
Before you go to your draw step, I have an
Oh,
effect. I have an
okay,
effect.
okay.
So before you draw, have you heard
Hmm.
about this thing called politics, Joe?
Is that a card? What color is it?
It's colorless. It is everyone can cast it. And you can
Ooh,
counter a spell for no mana. You just use your words.
how is this? Where's Sheldon? What have they been doing at Wizards of the Coast again?
I don't know, but it's really interesting, and I'd love to talk to you about it some.
You know what? That sounds like a wonderful idea. We should go get a drink. That's always good. I don't do a lot of like the test things out. I've always kind of flown by the seat of my pants, which is not worked out great for me given my record. I probably that's one of the areas that I've been wanting to improve personally on. So I feel like a lot of this conversation is going to be hopefully as insightful for the audience as it is like a learning experience for me, because I do
Yeah.
think that you are a politically very intimidating opponent.
Well, I don't know about intimidating is the right
No,
word.
no, 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 no. I'm not gonna let you just like downplay. No, you are one of the most intimidating players to sit across. Unless I know I am holding the nuts and you are holding nothing. That is the only time I feel comfortable facing you. Every other point of the game, I am shitting bricks.
I know. You give me a lot of praise there.
I, when you perform as well as you do, like I spend a lot of my time trying to like crack the code, so to speak.
I I guess I don't know. I don't know. I have a background with like some psychology studies and like
Mhm.
mentalism and communication studies, things like that. So that influences a lot of like when I'm trying to mess with people's heads in a game. That influences a lot about how I like direct attention and things like that.
Yeah,
Um, but I don't think there's ever been anything particularly special about it. Like it's nothing that like people can't figure out on their own if they're just like socially competent.
for sure. And I feel like for a lot of people, that's probably the biggest hurdle, right? Is like learning how to navigate social situations. Before we kind of like get into the politics of it all, I do want to like define something like pretty hard and fast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for as much as we talk about like misguiding, bluffing, misdirection, general buffoonery, and like smoke and mirrors, we do not lie. If we have something in our hand, we will maybe not say directly what it is, but we will say if we have something in our hand if it's relevant, or we'll just decline to answer. Or if we say that we are going to do something or tutor for something, we do that. I think that's a pretty hard and fast rule that me and you stick to, and a lot of our playgroups stick to. Is if we say we're going to do something or we say something, it is true. It might be shrouded a little bit, but we will not lie. I will not say I won't kill your thing and then kill your thing.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
like a baseline example, I want to get that out of the way right now. And I think for me and you, because me and you dabble in poker a little bit, right?
yes, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Bluffing is different from lying. Bluffing is misrepresentation. It's not like an outright lie. There is a gray area between lying and bluffing, but I do want to like establish that early on, because I know when people talk about politics, people get caught up in like a just lies. Like, no, if you have to lie and misrepresent the true game state, you I've said this before, I do not like that. I think that is a bad idea, and I think that makes you a lesser person and player to some degree.
Well, aside from all of the like ethical and moral constraints too, it's also harmful in a political game. It's
Mm-hmm.
harmful to yourself in the long con, for lack of a better term, because if you tell someone you're going to do something and then you don't follow through on that, not only are they not going to trust you for the rest of the game, where you might need them to cooperate with you to stop someone else from winning, but that also hurts like if you ever have to play with them again, or if they talk to their friends and then you end up playing with their friends. So
Mm-hmm.
like even within the scope of just one event, like if you break a deal with somebody, there's always the chance that they go to their friends like, yeah, this person was so and so, was really scummy, they lied to me about this. And then if you try and make a deal with somebody else, like somebody else who that opponent had gone and talked to, they're gonna be like, oh no, I recognize you, you're the XYZ guy that my friend told me about. Like, I'm not gonna trust you, I'm not gonna take your deal. Then you both end up losing. So
Or I'm not gonna. I can't. I know I can't trust you when our backs are against the wall and we need to figure out a way to stop the win that's happening.
yeah.
Um, I at some point everyone in the pod needs to lean on each other. I think that's where a lot of our politics hinge on is at some point everyone's going to need to cooperate with one another. Like
Mhm.
that is a fundamental truth. Even if it's like someone just going guns blazing, ripping Adnaz turn one, full steam ahead, like everyone else that's not Adnazing is trying to cooperate to figure out how to stop the player Adnazing, for an example.
For
Um,
sure.
and I think that is where the kind of divisiveness of CDH politics really enters into the fray. See a lot of people talking about how like, oh, this game shouldn't have politics. Then play a 1v1 format or play poker if you want the group aspect. I have never understood people who play CDH and don't like the politics aspect, because at least for me, that's half the reason I'm here.
Well, I think there's two different ways of looking at it, right? So you can say that politicking is communicating with other players to achieve a
Mm-hmm.
goal, collaborating, blah 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 blah. And then there's also the people who say I don't like politicking, and they're just gonna like they aren't gonna communicate with you. They're gonna be silent. They're gonna mind their own business. That's a fine and valid strategy too. Like that's more of like the make you have it type mentality, which is also like that's totally a way that you can play. It's not the way I
Mm-hmm.
play, but that's totally a way that you can, and there's like no disrespect meant to that. But the flip side of that is those people tend to also be the ones who say, I hate politicking, I'm not going to politic. Refusing to negotiate with others is inherently political. Like that is so if you're looking, I don't know what the dictionary definition of politics is, but I would imagine it's something along the lines of a communication between two entities that each wield power in some regard, and their actions and communications have some sort of implication upon something. So pretty broad definition generally, but it all politics all comes down to communication, and there are a lot of different ways to communicate, different styles, different strategies for communicating and adapting communications and getting others um, to interface with you in a way that's beneficial to whatever your goal is.
Mm-hmm.
But um, in the end, it does come down to communication, and refusing to communicate is a style of communication.
Yeah, and I don't mean to come off as like harsh. Like I'm fine with people that I agree with you. I don't have an issue with people who are like heads down, using the poker analogy, sunglasses on, headphones in, hoodie up, that kind of play style. Like that's fine. Do that. I just question why you're here is all. No shame against that play style or that like approach. I just think you're leaving advantage on the table a little bit. Like I feel like you're
That I
starting
would,
off
yeah.
that I feel like you're starting off on like not necessarily a wrong foot, just not the best foot.
In my opinion, you're definitely making the game harder on yourself,
Mm-hmm.
especially when because that play style is really really good when it's something like poker and it is all about just what the cards do, and it's like, do you have it, do you not? Like you're trying to assess whether or not your opponents have the nuts or the interaction to stop you or whatever. It's also really good in 1v1, is the whole sunglasses on mentality. But in a multiplayer format, the likelihood that your three opponents are going to not communicate with each other, so if three opponents communicate with each other, maybe like it's pretty likely, but it might not happen. If two opponents are communicating with each other while the other two opponents don't communicate between themselves, that's a really likely scenario that I've seen it happen a lot. One player
Yeah.
is a big table talker, and somebody else maybe is, or they're not opposed to it, and so once they're engaged with negotiations and conversations, they get into it, and now these two people start running away with the whole game politically, whereas the other two players who may be just content to sit there and let the cards talk for themselves. You can say it's gameplay or not, but we all know that the best counterspell is saying, "Hey, I'm not sure you want to cast that right now," and not having
Such
to
a
tap your
such a good
mana.
counter spell.
Um, so, so I don't know why. I understand it, but I don't know why one would want to play the game at a disadvantage to their opponents, because that is, in my mind, generally what refusing to politic does to you.
Yeah, even something as simple as like asking like what a card does and like questioning to the table, like you genuinely don't know, like does this thing win the game? Like does anyone know what like this card does? Is this I don't have the threat assessment on this card. Table, do you have information that I lack?
Oh,
Even
for
something as
sure.
simple as that goes so very far, especially if you're
That's
like honest about it and just like, I'm just trying to understand what's going on here.
Yeah,
You know?
that's really big. I know that I was playing in a game, it's a while back, but I was playing a game with some people who I hadn't played with before, and there was a Jund Darga list. I don't remember what they cast. Like they cast some sort of altar or something, and they started like popping off, and we ended up having to interact really suboptimally at a couple different points, and um, missed a choke point because the player to my left didn't force a negation the thing they were supposed to force, and at the end of the game we were debriefing, and they literally said, "Yeah, I just didn't know that was the choke point," and no one told me that like this was a thing that we should counter, and hey, that's on me. I assumed that my opponents knew what the threats were and they would counter it, and I should have spoken up. I usually do, but for whatever reason, in that instance, I didn't, and got punished for it. So that I definitely agree with you. Like making sure everyone knows. All right, so before the spell resolves, here's what it's gonna do. Let's make sure that we know how to interact with it the best, and communicating that style of let's not lose the game. Let's focus on our role one first. It's really important. It's really important politically to make sure that everyone's on the same page of we've got to make sure that we are not like getting blown out just because someone doesn't know they're supposed to interact here.
Yeah, it's similar to like judge calls in a way where like a lot of judge calls are fixed by just narrating what's happening. Like if like being able to narrate what is happening to the table from your perspective is a very potent tool, especially even more potent if you're able to not necessarily like hard curve the conversation away from you, just like deflecting, but just like guiding it a little, you know? Like, hey, this Douthie come down, that's pretty good, because it's shutting them down, but I know it shuts you down more. Like, obviously, you know, if the Douthie's a problem, probably a good idea to get rid of it for you sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, you're sitting here with Breach in your hand waiting for this Douthie to go.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think there's the other thing to point out is it's not like huge, but there is a substantial difference between politics and CDH and politics and TDH. Because
True.
aside from the like, okay, let's calculate points and decide when to ID here and all of that stuff, because that's always something that can be done in any style of tournament Magic. Like that's just determining rankings that was optimal for people moving into a top cut is always really important to consider. But just the way you have to politic, because like once something goes on the stack, you can't remove it. You can't. Your targets are locked in. You can't change it according to the MTSR and stuff like that. There's things you have to consider ahead of time. Things you have to say ahead of time that you have to really be on top of. And a lot of players jumping into tournament EDH might not like be as ready as they need to be. So I know like I'll pull from an example that I had a couple months back. I was playing in an event. I was playing Teferi, and my opponents were playing Thrasios something, and for whatever reason, they had a Pithing Needle in play. Okay, that's great. But Pithing Needle generally names Teferi. That's a really potent card at a table. It stops chainmail combos from going off. So generally, Thrasios or Kenrith or Teferi or I can't think of any other commanders with activated abilities, but just commanders with activated abilities in general are all super potent targets for like a Pithing Needle style effect to come down on. So Thrasios player spins the commander, flips the Pithing Needle, moves into their turn, and they start their turn by tapping some mana, and I jump in right then. It's like, okay, so before you do anything, I just like you tap some mana. I just want to make sure that we're on the same boat. Like, I get if you're gonna Pithing Needle Teferi, totally makes sense to me. It's a really strong card, but before you do, let's just talk about how that's going to impact the board state, because like let's discuss how like I might interact with you and what I may or may not be able to do to influence the table after that, like as far as stopping other people's from winning, because there was also Turbo Naz, there was a Blue Farm was at the table and somebody else. So it's like, okay, but if you turn off my engine, like I can't stop Blue Farm, blah 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 blah, makes their Croms attack Teferi instead of like players, so they can't draw cards. So let's just have that discussion. The player was like, okay, for sure. Pithing Needle literally never got cast after that. Like it never came up. But this the type of thing where you have to be ready. You have to like kind of jump the gun almost. Be like, hey, I know it. You might be thinking of doing this, and it's really bad for me. I'm acknowledging that flat out. But let's just talk about it beforehand, because if we take an action, it's locked in. We can't run it back because we're at competitive REL.
Yeah, no, that's a big one that I actually was able to whip out over. We just had an event this past week, and I was able to pull off that maneuver. Someone was going to fire Covenant to clear. I think like my doubt. No, it was my opposition agent.
Mhm.
And they were going to cast. I'm like, okay, we're going to cast that. Okay, I Oppo, absolutely, you need to get rid of that. I understand, but let's consider before we lock in that number the other things on the board we want to get rid of. Do we want to get rid of this Mizzet, this Dranith, this that and the other. Like I understand my things going perfectly fine. That's what you should be doing. However, let's take this opportunity because we can spread this a little bit farther. Let's consider our options here. And I think that's a really good take. That's an easy takeaway. Just making sure everyone's on board with just all of the options that are available to us, and definitely you have to be a little assertive. And for me, I'm not really big on assertion in those regards, but it's a
Yeah,
really easy thing to pull out.
it can be
And
hard for players who are a little more timid for sure.
definitely.
I think that Fire Covenant's a really good example, just to elaborate more on the like, make sure you're talking before things get locked in. Because I was actually in that game as well, and this is a really good example because Fire Covenant has an additional cost that you have to pay in order to target. So they're like, I'm going to be casting Fire Covenant. They declare their intent, and then before they choose to pay the alternative costs, the spell hasn't targeted anything. You jumped in there and you're like, all right, well, let's talk about, before you target anything, let's talk about it. Because at this point, X is flexible. They can decide what to target and how much life to pay and things like that. So it's very adjustable. So they're going to be casting Fire Covenant. Great, we know this. They've declared their intent to cast a spell, but they haven't locked in a number yet or targets. So there's still wiggle room on like, this might be really good to remove so we don't lose the game, or that might be really important to not kill so that it stops so and so. And so that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those like really easy like keep in your back pocket type of tricks that like sometimes it might save you, other times or sometimes it might win you the game. Most of the time, it's to make sure you all don't lose primarily.
It's
And I
it's
think
not gonna throw a game. It will throw games away. It doesn't frequently like win you games, but it's just
no.
important to communicate.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to politics, like making sure that everyone is like communicating to some degree and making sure everyone's like on board with like what's going on, like okay, who's the threat assessment, all that stuff like that. It all feeds into each other.
For
Because at the end
sure.
of the day, like I think politics is better served as just good table talk, good table manners. Making sure everyone's playing to the best of their abilities.
Oh,
Really,
absolutely.
is at the end of the day, like I see you do this one all the time where like you like gas an opponent up slightly only to kind of like guide their hand a little.
That's, what can I say?
It,
People like feeling good. If you're
no,
gonna
it's
make
a
them
great
feel
trick.
good,
It's a great little thing, and also like it just oh man, this Atlas guy is pretty cool.
I'm all right.
Yeah, no, it's a very different approach because I generally, when it comes to those kinds of social situations, have like just a different approach. I'm very like problem solvy. I have a don't have like education in it, but I come from sales experience, so I'm all about like, okay, we have a problem. Let's talk about the problem. Let's explore solutions for the problem. Let's figure out what your best solution here in this moment is. Like if I'm the threat, I will constantly talk through like all my lines, like, oh yeah, I could do this, and this, or like I have this, like yeah, like I totally understand that. Like if you have to remove things, like this is like priority 1, 2, 3, like these kinds of things, like often to my detriment. But I feel like that allows me to curry favor with a table more, especially as I tend to like more aggressively slanted decks than more control-y decks. I've learned the
Sure.
past few months. So being able to kind of remove myself from that situation and be like, no, I totally understand. Like, if you have to stop me, like, I'm not gonna tell you my choke points. Obviously, that's for you to figure out and for me to figure out as well. But like on the board state, like this is like public information. Like I'll probably be like, if it's this like just kill the oppo, like that's what's locking all you down. Like if you have to kill anything on my board, like this is the thing to kill, obviously. And just like, oh, well, if this guy's willing to help himself lose, that's crazy. It's like, yeah, I am. You should counter the thing that's going to stop me, though.
Yeah, I think, well, because like we said, so, and we're going to keep coming back to this theme, but politics is at its core, it's just different ways of communicating with people. And so
Mhm.
making sure that making sure that that communication is really clear and very honest and open is very important for effective communication and effective politics. I know that one of the single best things a player can do that has no impact on the game, but it makes everyone play better, and it makes everyone more receptive to gameplay going forward, like discussing with one another. Just if the stack gets complex, ask to construct it.
Construct the stack.
Yeah, and it's this particularly won't help you like win any games. It's also not going to throw any games away, but it's just really nice because it helps the entire table understand clearly what's going on, and that clear understanding translates into better gameplay for everyone. So just saying, okay, hey guys, I think I have something I want to do, but before we do, can we construct the stack? And just taking all the spells and representative cards of all the abilities and stuff. Putting that in order on the stack, like one card on top of the other, is just really, really easy, simple, and helpful for everyone.
Yeah, construct. There's also no shame in doing it. Like, it's 4 players, like especially 4 blue players with counter spells and like Rhystic triggers and Esper Sentinel triggers and Remore triggers and fetch lands and Oppos. Like, stacks get complicated very, very fast. So being able to just slow down a little bit and be like, okay, we all need to know we all need to be on the same page. Like, it doesn't matter like what anyone has. Like, for everyone's benefit, we need to clearly see and demonstrate that we all know what is happening. So that way, everyone can take their best step forward. Not just me, not just my opponents, everyone on the table. Which I don't know. I see a lot of people talk about like trying to improve their own game, and I understand that, but I also think being able to bring up the tables game is equally as important in like when it comes to just being a good CDH player, a good TDH player. You know, I feel like constructing the stack is a huge boon to that, because maybe some people are like have problems like visualizing the stack or like keeping track of it. Like, this helps make sure that everyone clearly understands what is happening.
Well, I remember at one event we went to, somebody brought, and I didn't play with this person, but a couple of you all did. Somebody brought a literal pad, like not just like a legal note pad, but like a large like large sticky note style. Put it on an easel style pad of paper to write down everything on the stack, and they would write down every game action that happened when there was something going on the stack, and then you say this trigger, that trigger, this trigger, that trigger, so and so cast a spell, so and so targeted this, and so just being able to look back at that written record, really intricate, probably very time consuming, but also a very useful tool. Very, very useful tool for, like you said, bringing up the whole gameplay of the table to make sure that everyone is playing effectively to the best of their ability, because that everyone playing well and playing effectively is truly what makes the game fun, and what also makes the gameplay like meaningful. Because if you're just stomping people like pub stomp, go play against a bunch of casual decks, or if you're being like, the stack is really obscure and no one's sure what's going on, and things are just being made to auto resolve, passing priority like inconsequentially, the games get muddy, and it just leaves everyone, doesn't matter who wins, everyone walks away feeling kind of like that game could have been so much better.
And that's definitely like the commander spirit, like in full effect, just at a high level. Like, we all want the game to be good. Like, I don't, as much as like we all want to win, I think, like, secondarily or even primarily to that, like, we all want a good game at the end of the day. Like, I want to bring my deck to a CDH pod, and I want to be impactful, you know? At the end of the day, like, I want to make it so that my presence, my decisions had impact on this game. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Let's guide our hand a little bit to the more nefarious side of politics, where we're casting counter spells with our words. Our tongues are deflecting swats. Our waves of our hands are silences. Let's talk about manipulating people. I'm making this sound evil, but like, an element to politics, and I think this is where a lot of people get wary and not want to like engage in politics, is the notion that you're someone's puppet, you know?
Sure.
To some degree, for sure. I want to win the game. These are things I'm going to use to my advantage. But I also don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a decent skill set to have.
Well, there is a misconception when people use the term politicking.
Mm-hmm.
People think manipulative, they think puppet mastery, they think Machiavellian, and while those can all play a role in different people's play styles and they can have impacts on games, it can also be that those particular elements don't enter into a game at all. Like you can just have a very wholesome, straightforward game where everyone is communicating with one another directly. Sometimes Machiavellian politics backfire drastically because you try and subvert something and you walk into something else like that you didn't know that was there, and everyone's like, you got me, but not again. But that whole element, it's really important to be aware of like the battles that you're picking and choosing, because like you said earlier, lying can be really detrimental. So you got to make sure that if you are using misinformation, if you are trying to mislead your opponents on like ways that to interact with you, that you're not telling them like an outright lie. It would be like something along broad example would be something along the lines of, well, like I could go get a stacks piece with this tutor, so I'm not sure that you want to counter it. And somebody says, oh yeah, well I could go get a stacks piece, and then you instead go get like Thassa's Oracle or something like that. Well, you didn't say you would get a stacks piece, you said you could get a stacks piece. And yes, like it's semantic, it's like it's very picky, but at the same time, like you didn't make a deal with someone, so there's nothing to really hold you to. You didn't lie to them. So, and of course it comes down to per players. Not everyone's going to see things the same way. I've definitely talked with people who are like, oh yeah, like you can totally lie in the game. And I'm like, I mean, I guess like you can, I'm never going to, but if someone lies to me after I've made a deal with them, I'm never going to trust them. And I will make their life a living hell for the rest of that game. But like at the same time, like that's the way they want to play it. But they have to be willing to live with the repercussions that their actions generate from my side of the table. Because my policy is, if you're gonna lie to me, I'm just gonna retaliate. Like in game, of course. But like I'm gonna start nuking all of your stuff first, even if it's maybe not technically optimal gameplay. Right? So and I'll make that clear. Like, don't lie to me, because I will like, that's going to generate an enemy from me. You don't want to do that because it makes your life so much harder than it needs to be.
In that instance, where in this proposed scenario where a player lies to you and you turn around and say, "Cool, you are my primary target," where's the line of where you would consider that like spite play to some degree?
So I'm not going
to me it sounds not exactly spite play, but like adjacent to it.
Yeah, no, I think so. There's a lot of really good discussions about spite play on a variety of podcasts and stuff, and people are always going to take their own views on this. I think Sadnaz had a really good episodes about King making a spite play a while back. So go check that out if you're interested in hearing that discussion. But they basically settled on the idea of, you can't king make, you can't spite play in CEDH, because like whatever you're doing is supposed to get you closer to winning the game. Which I agree with half of that. I think that there are weird situations that can pop up where I can take if I take no game actions, somebody wins. If I take any game actions, the other person wins. And so that's there are weird situations like that that do pop up. That said, I'm not sure. I'm of the opinion that spite plays, I'm not sure they exist in CEDH, because before you go and lie to me, I will, like, if I think there's a chance that you're going to, I will say, hey, don't do this, because this is going to be my response. If you lie to me, my response in kind is going to be to make sure that you don't win this game, even if I don't win this game. And that is a risk that my opponents now have to weigh. Is am I bluffing, or am I dead serious? It's like, yeah, I'm going to pact of negation every spell you cast. I'm going to kill every dork you play, even though the breach player to my left is just going uninhibited, because you lied to me. So that's whether or not that's true. Like, that's an evaluation that your opponent then has to make, right? So I think that's
It's
something that it is a, in and of itself, a political tool. It is a style. As long as you say it to your opponent ahead of time, as long as you communicate to that to them, that is a political tool. You are threatening force, which is technically a political tool.
yeah, it's hearing you describe it in that way. It's very much like it's a tool in your belt, and I think the difference that a lot of people don't pick up on is you set the expectation of, hey, if you're thinking about doing this, understand that if you choose wrong, I'm going to do this. It may not be the right move. It is the move I am making, though. So proceed as you will with that information. And I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Absolutely. Well, and so going off of that is, when I look at politics in a game, um, I tend to evaluate them, and I think I've mentioned this before in another episode. I tend to evaluate them in terms of like geopolitical entities, right? So player one is a nation, player two is a nation, 3 and 4 are different nations, right? So, and if you look at that, I have a little bit of a background in international communication studies, so you can take different styles of communication that work for different global powers and different tools that are used, and you can sort of scale them down and say something similar, right? So the threat of mutual destruction is an example that I just proposed, right? It's like, if you do something that is going to be detrimental to me, that's going to threaten me, I'm going to respond by destroying you, even though I know I'm not going to survive it, right? So that threat of mutually assured destruction is a tool that different nations can be seen using against each other at different times. And there are a lot of different examples that you can take and you can scale down. And me being the weirdo that I am, this is something that I do in my free time sometimes. Is I brainstorm different ways you can scale down geopolitical communication tools to use in Magic the Gathering.
I don't think I've ever heard you say a sentence that so perfectly captures you. Yes, this big this big global thing that happens. I'm going to find a way to use this in my Magic the Gathering cardboard. Incredible. No, I think
It sounds so
that
silly.
it sounds silly.
It is.
But then I look at you like going on tears and like just walking into any game and doing whatever the fuck you want to do. And I'm just like, there's a nugget of truth there. Like there's something there that I'm obviously not doing. Because I think you said at the top of the episode, like, you don't think that you're doing anything like crazy or anything. But that's a crazy thing you're doing, is taking the theory of mutually assured destruction and trying to translate that appropriately and nicely and politely, as mutually assured destruction always is, very polite, very upfront, in multiplayer Magic the Gathering. Like, you see that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I just think, yeah.
It's a funny thing to say. But I think if you are not brewer's mentality, if you're not constantly trying to improve on these certain aspects of the game, not only are you going to be left behind, you're also not going to be discovering something that you may be uniquely able to take advantage of that maybe other people can't. Like, you can listen to all of the great, like social deduction, social engineering, all kinds of things mentioned previously, like IT work and like hacking and stuff like that. And penetration testing is a particular field that I'm fascinated by, absolutely enamored with. And the idea of social engineering is, you're trying to convince, someone or something to divulge information, or you're it's the nice way of saying manipulating people.
Yeah. Social hacking is so interesting. Who needs to hack tech when you can just get someone to tell you what the password is?
The weakest technology is the person, unfortunately. It is also the strongest technology. But I digress. It's, taking all of these different aspects of social interactions is going to matter in Magic the Gathering. Now I sound crazy.
No, definitely. And that's honestly that's one of the big tenets of the discussion around politics when it first started to pop up in like podcasts and YouTube content and stuff was, man, politics is like really unfair because some players who really enjoy Magic, who are good players, don't have the same social skills that other people do. And so and I totally agree with that. I think that it is like really unfair the advantage that some players can enter the game with just because they're super charismatic. Um, but that said, like that isn't realistically the card game, and because it is a multiplayer game, and the rules don't say you can't talk because you are allowed to talk um, during the game. There's nothing wrong with that, and it that aspect politicking then itself becomes an aspect of the game, and some players are going to be innately more good at it, and some players are going to have to work a lot harder, just as some players are going to be really good at like assessing the numbers of their decks and figuring out like this play is mathematically optimal, while other players are going to have to struggle a lot more with that type of like risk to reward assessment. And so like those are just different things, and uh, it's unfortunate that the social aspect can also be affected uh, people's personalities or like
An
different,
infinite number of
yeah,
possibilities.
different places they enter the game from in like their own personal lives. So that's, and the fact that that can be an an actual detriment to players in games depending on who you're potted up with is really unfortunate. But once again, it's something that like as a player you have to account for in a multiplayer format. Like something like relatively vanilla is just like if you have a stutter or if you're soft spoken, that is going to realistically be an active detriment to you in a game, because if you're soft spoken, you're probably going to be a little bit easier to talk over. People might not pay attention to what you're saying as actively than if someone is very loud and very verbose. They're going to take a lot of the table's attention when they're speaking, right? Or if you have a stutter, it might make it hard for someone else to gauge what you're saying. Or worst case scenario, you implement your stutter in a game on accident, and somebody else gets annoyed by it and they lash out at you for it. Like that's the far reach of that more
Very
vanilla
far
example.
example, but yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like it's something that players have to be aware of, especially if they want to optimize their political play, which is all what this episode is all about.
Yeah. It we I think you said it best when you said like we all come from different backgrounds, like in the game, socially, like we're all individual people. We're all going to have very different approaches to the game, and making use of politics is a way to either equalize, get ahead, catch up, whatever. Like it's another tool in your arsenal outside of your cardboard. And me and you have talked a lot about like cardboard mattering or people mattering just kind of in our off time, and like politics is a people matter thing, you know. And nothing wrong with deciding to leave that on the table and trying to play, you know, the best, most tight technical play possible. That's also totally valid. Yeah, no, it's very interesting stuff. You think about this stuff a lot more than I do.
I do. I told you I'm a freak. I'm a weirdo. I have a twisted interest in the human psyche, and so it's
Mhm.
just really interesting to me to parse apart games and see how people interact with one another, and then think about different ways that you can like optimize your own gameplay, treating communication and people skills as an actual tool that you can bring. Like it's to some extent, it's like setting up a sideboard. Like
Mhm.
if you, I something I do is I don't do it constantly, but I do it on a regular basis. Is I'll be playing a game and I'll come up with an idea or a theory about like how to set people up in a situation that I can then get them to do a certain thing. So it's, yes, sure, it's manipulative, but it's in good faith. It's in a game. I'm not trying to
It,
do this. Don't take any of this stuff and use it in real life. That's bad. We don't want to do that.
We're talking about these things in the confines of like I don't want your wizard spell to stop my wizard ball. Like
exactly,
like
exactly.
we're talking
Preface all of
silly
it.
stuff. Yeah, we're
moving
talking
into some of the more like scenario oriented stuff with
like
this is
we're
all in
not
the context of a game.
yeah
So
we're here. All of this stuff stops as soon as a winner is declared in our table, and everyone's smiley, happy, jokey. Like I'm not trying to manipulate you
after the
outside of
tournament
the table.
ends,
Yeah,
the manipulation ends. Let's phrase it like that.
Okay, we're going that far. For me, I'm like, I don't know. I just try and be happy and smiley where I can, really.
Yeah. But so that aside, like I prep like different scenarios in my head, or going from casual games. Like, okay, well, if someone has like this stacks piece and I want this other person to remove it, what can I say that would encourage them to remove it? So I come up with different phrases and things like that I could craft. And then I'll test them out like in different scenarios and see what sort of baseline tends to work the best, and then you can like workshop it. And then worst case scenarios, I'm crafting these on the fly in tournament, which is I've done it once or twice before, but it's wildly like scary as the person's like, well, if I lose this round and I'm at 0 points, not 3, or at 1 for the round, and that skews my rankings. So like you can do it. I don't recommend it. If you're gonna be a highly political player, I would recommend prepping some of your political go-tos ahead of time. But I set these things up as heuristics for myself to where I can just recall them quickly, and then and be like, okay, well, this play is typically effective in this type of scenario, and then just kind of tailor it and then implement it within the game. So like I said, it's kind of like setting up a sideboard for myself for social gameplay, because I do see that as its own separate facet of the game outside of the cardboard. Because you can have the nuts in your hand, or I see it as you can also have the nuts on the table. Like you can just like maybe your hand is super suboptimal or someone else's cards are just god tier, but that doesn't necessarily matter if you have convinced everyone to counter each other's spells and let you just play the game unaffected. If everyone's just going to let you do your own thing, doesn't matter if someone else has the nuts or if you don't.
Yeah, I mean it brings it back to poker. I mean, you can have the technical best hand at the table, but if you can still the weaker hand can still bluff out the better hand given the right like play, signaling, nonverbal communication, verbal communication,
Oh yeah,
and
don't
then
forget
the actual
NLP. If you're talking neurolinguistic
NLP,
programming, can't forget that.
yeah, all that stuff like that can happen, and that can definitely happen in Magic. I mean, the amount of times that I mean, heck, the other day, is someone was like, yeah, I had like 3 counter spells in hand, and you just like weren't presenting like anything, and I didn't put you on anything, and then I went for the win like through one piece of interaction when they could have held up like several other pieces of interaction. By all means, I should not have won the turn I did, but I did. Yeah, no, it's interesting that in a previous episode we talked about windows, and I think that's really good for trying to like figure out where your windows are. I was talking with a buddy of mine earlier today, actually, about how like as someone who likes to play Rakdos, who likes to play non-blue, like I think if you're not playing blue, you have to put some work into your politics, because when you sit down at a table, your worth diminishes very, very fast, or it elongates it, depending on if you have exactly like Oppo and Mayhem Double, like critical stacks and control creatures those are your bargaining chips. Those are the reasons to keep you around. Blue is pretty easy to lean on in that regard. That's why I've jokingly said it as like it's a crutch. Is like the reason to keep a blue player around, or at least in the game to some degree, is they will have the cleanest answers to the problem things on any given board. And as someone who plays non-blue, that I have been trying to figure out my style and implement more, is trying to give myself more bargaining power, give myself as many chips as possible, to give people reasons to keep me around the game, despite my function in the game being to try and win as many times as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
You look at Stack, like their whole thing is they stop the fast players. Control players, they are able to deal with the problematic things very surgically. The pure Adnaz player, even though I don't play Adnaz at this point, my worth is very, very limited in that regard. So why wouldn't you try and like as like my political antagonist? Why would you not try to direct the firepower at me? so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's definitely something to keep in mind. Is table focus is something that I'm hyper aware of in a game, and sometimes it really matters, and sometimes it doesn't really
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
It scales depending on like what your pod composition looks like, but table focus is that's what I call it. It's generally the idea of who's the threat at the time, like who are people directing their resources at stopping, and it can play a really weird like sort of like ping pong with the table, where in theory I'm trying to win or I'm setting up to win, so now I'm the threat. You're set now. I've passed the turn, so now you're setting up to win. Now you're the threat. Um,
There's an
I think
energy,
a
there's a
really good
flow to
one
the
card.
table.
Yeah, I think a really good one card example of this is Wishclaw Talismans. Like I have a
Oh
tutor.
yeah. Yep.
I am the threat. I crack the talisman and pass to someone else. After we get through this person's turn, the person who has the talisman, now on their turn, they're the threat, right? It's a really good way to sort of exemplify table focus in one card. More complex scenarios could be something along the lines of what happened to us in a game the other day, where one player is super, super far ahead. They're popping off, and they have all the resources to win.
By all means, they should have won.
And so everyone's dedicating all their resources to stopping them. But it's going to take. It has to be on their next turn because they have to untap first, right? So it gets to my turn, and I cast a big scary card, but it's not that much of a problem. It's not a combo card. Um, it's not super impressive when someone else is demonstrating literal lethal on their turn. And then it goes around the table, and everyone's ignoring my crazy value engine because player C is popping off over here. And then player C, but to player C, I'm still not the threat with my crazy value engine because I don't have the stacks piece that's stopping them. There's a Mayhem Devil in play that's stopping them from cracking their treasures, and an op controlled by the same player, which is
That's
Joe,
That's me.
that is also stopping them from tutoring for the win. So to them, their focus is entirely directed at Joe. This basically means that me with my draw engine here, I'll just draw cards every time someone casts a spell, and then it's going to get back to my turn, and no one really noticed until, oh wait, we're about to pass the turn, and I'm untapping with like 20 something cards in my hand because I just wasn't the focus. No one asked me how many cards from my hand. No one said, hey, we should worry about that. And so that's a great example of like table focus and how you can direct table focus. And it's something that in that game, for example, I was specifically aware of. And so the player who's trying to win, I knew these other two cards. They may or may not have actually stopped them from winning, but they're scary things, and they could, in theory, stop them from winning, especially if they need to cast a tutor. So I'm saying, oh hey, that op's like really locking me down right now. Sure, it's locking me down, but I'm not trying to win. Everyone sees that I'm not trying to win right here, because I only have like 3 cards in my hand at this point, and I'm all tapped out, and all because I just resolved my draw engine. Um, and so this Mayhem Devil and this Joe controls the Mayhem Devil and the Op. They have the entire table locked down, but they can play uninhibited. So directing the player 3's focus over there really, really useful because it draws eyes away from the fact that every time someone plays a spell, I'm drawing a card.
I was so keenly aware as soon as you put that card in play. I Politics aside, I saw that card come down. I'm like, oh, cool. So Atlas thinks they can win on their next turn.
It's a value engine. What can I say? People let you just draw cards for free. Of course, you're going to win on your next turn.
I think that's a really good example of like being able to narrate the table. Like in that instance where you were able to resolve your big scary value engine that took over the game and ruined my life forever. All you really did was take the heat off of you, be like, hey, I'm tapped out. I'm just trying to draw some cards here. Like I can't win like at instant speed. However, like on the table, these are the things that is locking you, big scary player, down. You're trying to win the game, right? Hey, this is the big target you need to hit. And I think it beautifully executed, masterfully done. But I think that in essence ties a lot of what I would identify to be your political style of like, hey, I'm just here to have a good time. This is the guy that's ruining your good time, so hit him.
Yeah,
Which
more or less.
Which, as I like handling those situations because I have to go, okay, I understand I'm scary. Understand like I have 3 cards in hand. If I could try to win, I would be trying to win and not having this conversation. Um we can work together on this and try and keep my stuff around, right? Right? Okay, okay, okay. And try and like water bends that kind of energy towards whatever I think is the biggest threat at the table.
Yeah, and I think that like that focus is a really key component to effective politicking, is being able to direct table focus and say, look, I know that what I'm doing is bad, but what they're doing is so much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's basically what table focus boils down to. Another really important aspect that I think plays a role in effective politics is when working together, making sure, because if your opponents have a chance to slow you down while also slowing someone else down, of course they're going to take it because it advantages them, right? So a great example is chain of vapor. If I know that I have a chain and I don't like something you have, but something else that someone else has is going to be losing me the game, I'm going to chain the thing that I don't like and force you to chain the thing that loses us the game, right? So that's a good example. So
Classic.
being able to negotiate with your opponents, and um, it's another form of focus direction, I guess. Aside from just like the entire table, but saying, hey, so if you chain my thing, then I'm gonna have to sack a land to bounce that. But if you do that, while it gets rid of the thing that you don't like, then I won't be able to take this action that's actually gonna benefit you on your turn. And that's something that you can do as well. But when you're doing that, you have to like take into account turn order and things like that. Those sort of like negotiations you can make with individual cards and how they're going to affect one player versus another, and how it's going to affect one player and cause that player to affect another player, of which chain is a prime example, is really useful skill when it comes to politicking.
Mhm. I think with Chain of Vapor specifically, it's a very like one-to-one comparison of like that like kind of abstract idea like printed onto cardboard. Like I feel like everyone's experienced the God Chain of Vapor where it's like, okay, we all agree this is the problem, right? Everyone's in agreement. I have the thing that can get rid of it. Cool. I'm gonna get rid of the Dranith that's locking me out of the game. Now you're gonna have to deal with it because we all agreed that this was the bad thing that needed to get gone.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something that happens. Then of course you have to be aware of those, like that player might not continue the chain, like you don't have control of it at that point.
It's a
So
gamble.
that's when that negotiation comes into play. Is like I I have found it to be very effective to tell your opponents your plan. When you know you're going to be doing something, tell your opponents what you're doing and lay out your logic for them before you do it or as you're doing it. So in that case, so I have this chain of vapor, right? And we need to get that Malcolm off the field, or we lose to the Glinthorn combo. But I also cannot play the game through your Draenith Magistrate. So I'm going to have to bounce your Dranith here, and then you're going to have to sack a land to bounce the Malcolm, because we'll lose if we don't do this. But I'm also going to be losing either way. So for me, it makes the most sense to bounce the Dranith and take the gamble on the fact that you're also going to sack the land to chain the Malcolm, so that we don't lose, and that will allow me to get back into the game. And that's really typically pretty effective when you can't demonstrate a win by whatever you're removing. Otherwise, a player might clap back with something that they respond in kind. So okay, I get that, but if you're going to be chain of vaporing my Dranith, I know that when you're, I don't know what's a commander that wins the game out of the blue. I know Goto can't play chain, but uh,
Yeah.
if your Goto leaves the command zone, I lose the game on the spot. So if you bounce my Dranith, I will not be bouncing the Malcolm, because I've lost either way since you untap before me, and it doesn't matter. So don't chain the Dranith and try and find a different way to deal with it. And then you can like enter into those sort of like negotiations, right? But that's, I keep using the term respond in kind. It's that in and of itself a term used in business negotiations. So if someone hits you with a highball offer, you can respond in kind. You can hit them back with a lowball offer. And typically these types of negotiations and they devolve and end up with parties walking away or becoming conflicted at one another, which is something to be aware of as a third party. If you don't like the fact that a Drannith would be disappearing, but you really still want the Malcolm to disappear, you can, and you also want to make the Godo player the enemy of whoever controls the Drannith, you can yourself escalate these tensions, and cause opponents to respond in kind through your own interjections, thus increasing the tension between those two players, meaning that their negotiations in the future are going to be hostile and less likely to succeed. And then you, as a third party, can step in and serve as an arbiter and say, "Look, guys, I know that we all know that the Malcolm needs to leave the battlefield. So how about instead of chaining the Drannith, we just chain this thing instead, and then, or like, that is mine. That's probably doesn't matter. And then I will chain the Malcolm for everybody if we really want to, or we can just chain the Malcolm." And then, however, that situation ends up resolving itself now that you enter the negotiations. But that's definitely something to keep in mind, is if two parties are butting heads and you think it's going to be advantageous for them to be aggressive towards one another in game, stoke those flames, make them conflict with one another.
Absolutely. I think as soon as you're able to get someone to take the table's attention and have it not be you, you're usually going to be able to find a way to win a game more often than not. I feel like that's a pretty easy thing to like take advantage of. Is like, okay, well, the two turbo players are fighting over each other and there's only one control player. Like, I'm just going to untap and win because y'all did not pay attention to me.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, that happens all the time. Is people
It's
will
super
say, "Oh,
common.
you used all your interaction and passed to me. Well, all right, I guess I'm going to win the game." And that's a great example of what you're saying. And this is just like the step before that. Like, this is how you can set yourself up to move into that situation.
The other thing I personally think of when I think of politics is deal making. Now, we're all familiar with deal making. I don't really make many deals in Commander, or I should say, I don't make a lot of very obvious deals. There's a lot of like constant small deals I'll make. Like, hey, I'll like ask the table, like, hey, should I get like interaction here? And everyone's like, yeah, interaction's probably good here. And then I just go and get interaction. You know, like I would consider that like a deal. Like I am proposing something that I want to do, or I'm offering deals to people. I'm like, hey, I think it's probably best for us to get this in this situation. I need you to follow up with that. Deals are hard in CDH primarily because you're the one that's always holding the bag. Or sorry, I should rephrase. The person proposing the deal is always the one holding the bag, and it's so easy to leave them hanging. It's so easy, especially if you don't have like any way to like reinforce your idea through game mechanics like counter spells or removal or big beefy dudes that just beat you up in 2 turns. I don't know what's your general opinion on deals, Atlas?
I think deals can be really useful. I think it's, but you got to look at it sort of like a contract law type thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you're going to propose a deal, obviously you have to keep up your end. Otherwise, players aren't going to trust you in the future, and it's going to be harder to win games and make negotiations going forwards. Right? People are always going to start looking at you with suspicion and distrust. But if you're able to sort of like lawyer or like letter of the law your way into something that's like really advantageous to you, or like you can exploit something. Some players might agree with it, some players might not, but as I've found it to be true, that as long as you are able to explain why you didn't break a deal, if someone says, "Hey, you broke that deal," post game, players are like, "Okay, well, I don't agree with it, but you don't think you broke the deal, and you've laid out to me why you don't think you've broken the deal. So like, I accept it, and I'm not mad at you." Like, it's not like a broken trust thing at that point. It's just like, okay, well, maybe I have to be a little bit more careful, more selective with the deals I accept at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So deals can be really useful. I think deals sometimes are kind of gimmicky and quaint. So it's like, if you're like, "Hey, don't do X, and I won't like attack you for 4 turns," or whatever. Like, that's a very casual mentality type thing. That doesn't. It's
doesn't
not
do
usually
anything.
going to happen, right? Some a more competitive version that I think can be quite effective, and I have seen people take, I have proposed and had people take is, hey, I know that you're hitting me with your thing that's killing me, and I'm going to die very soon. So I have this removal spell, but I don't think it's optimal to use it on that. So just cut me some slack, and I won't use this on your guy. I'll be able to save it for now. But if you attack me, like, then I'm going to have to use it on your guy, which is going to make us both burn resources, and your guy may end up dying, he may end up not dying. And that forces players to really evaluate, is it worth it to keep kicking the shit out of you and like trying to kill you, or doing something that will result in your death? Like, do they really want you dead, or are you more valuable as someone who's holding a removal spell for a different opponent, or is it more valuable for them to just have whatever it is that they're attacking you with? That can be really successful. Then board states change in one round. It's like, okay, well, now you're the threat. Like, I have to keep attacking you. And if you lay it out like that, like, even if it would be like, quote unquote, breaking the deal because you said you wouldn't attack me, I have, once again, just communicating and laying out why, well, things have changed. I'm going to have to start attacking you and pressuring you now. Players would be like, yeah, okay, I get that. Happened to me the other day. I was playing a game with somebody and they had a Tivit and they were attacking me. I had taken like 3 hits, so I wasn't dead, but it was getting rough. And
3 hits with Tivit is 1.
Or 3. So I guess I'd taken 2 hits.
Yeah.
But I had 2 hits left. Was my point there. So it was rough. I was at like 22 life or something because I'd taken damage and 12 Tivit damage. I have to get this Gilded Drake and I can pay for Tivit's ward trigger. And I'm like, look, I don't want to spend 5 mana to get rid of your Tivit. And I know that you want your Tivit. So please just stop attacking me for now. Like, I'm not going to impose any conditions or whatever, but just don't attack me for now. And I'm not going to Drake your guy. And they're like, okay, seems fair enough. And then I am able to go on and continue playing the game and not get hit by Tivit for another turn or two. And then I put myself in an advantage state and I'm trying to win the game. And they're like, well, I'm going to start attacking you with Tivit. And I'm like, oh yeah, I totally get that. Like, go ahead and hit me with Tivit now. Like, I am the threat. Pressuring my life total is something you can totally do. But like, I'm no hard feelings. I don't feel like you've broken our deal at all because you didn't attack me for 1 turn. Like, that at least gave me a breathing space where I wasn't burning all my energy trying to just not die. And I think that's a really good example of how deals can work in CEDH. But I think if you're going to do something, or like, hey, I know you have an op. I'm going to cast this D tutor, and I'm going to get a counterspell. So don't op my D tutor. And if like, maybe there's a reason like the other person can't cast the counterspell, they don't have the mana to, or it's an Aven Mind Sensor would be an even better example. So like, mana can't get color shifted, and you're getting a counterspell. That player's not on blue. Okay, well, they're not going to be casting your counterspell, so let them get the counterspell instead of Mind Censoring them. That'd be another example of like something like, it's small enough that it's not like passing the game to somebody, because you're going to go get the counterspell you said you're going to get, and whether or not you use that counterspell to defend your game-winning play or stop somebody else from trying to win the game, that is undecided. That's a risk that the person with the sensor is going to have to try and take. Is maybe you are getting a counterspell to try and win the game with the Thassa consult in your hand, or maybe you're scared of the Rocco player over there, and you're getting a Force of Will to counter their next Rocco. Like, there are just different things that players on both sides of a deal have to assess. There's always going to be a little bit of a risk take either way, because if you say, I'm going to go get a counterspell with this D shooter, please don't op me, and the other player says, I mean, go ahead and cast the D shooter. They didn't say they weren't going to op you, so they can, for all intents and purposes that I would see as a highly political player, they are well within their rights to op you or not, as they see fit. It's just you're taking that gamble then on faith that the D tutor is going to resolve and you're going to get the counterspell.
Mm-hmm. And that particular scenario is another one that happened in that one game. That game had a lot of moments we're pulling from. It was a good game, a very good game, where the blue farm player cast a Diabolic Intent into a known and bounced opposition agent to my hand. Going into your game-winning turn, I asked them, like, you gotta tell me what you're getting here, because there is no reason I don't op you right now. But you gotta tell me what you're getting here. And he basically said to the effect of, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. And I went, that's not a reason. Turns out he was gonna try and win on his turn, so it was the right move for me to do. But in that instance, where as someone who has like the tool to stop someone, I in that situation where it's like we need all the help we can get, but I'm also not going to say no to literal free advantage. You got to give me a reason to work with you. I'm willing to work with you. Just give me the reason.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
and I think that's one of the big proponents, or one of the big tenets of like my playstyle is like, I'm down to work. You got to give me something to work on though. Otherwise, I'm going to have to assume what I need to assume in a given situation. However, if you either convince me or politic me or give me something to work with, and then I can work with you. If you don't give me anything, I can't work with you. I can't, not necessarily trust or like believe. I'm just gonna try and advance my own position.
Yeah, no, and I think that's that's the way that you should be playing the game, right? Like you should, if you're not trying to stop someone else, you should be trying to win the game, and make it other people's problem to stop you. It
Mhm.
goes back to our whole step one, step two idea, right? It's like you step one, you don't want to lose, and step two, you're trying to win the game. So if you're not trying to not lose the game, then you should be trying to win the game. That's a great
Mhm.
example of that.
I did have something on that the Gilded Drake and Tidit note. I think also when you do like the hey, stop trying to kill me and I won't have to try and stop you from killing me. You also like tip your hand and show a table like I have tools that can deal with the table. I feel like that can definitely go either way, right?
Yeah, so there's a weird dynamic where it's like sometimes a force of will in hand is a stacks piece, and nobody's casting any great spells, or sometimes a known force of will in hand is a liability, and people are just going to start running out whatever they want, as they normally would, and anyone with a counter spell before you in turn order says, "Yeah, pass priority," and just make it your problem, right? So that's something to be aware of. It's like if you're making other people aware of the interaction that you're working with, that's always a risk you're posing. Is you're just going to get priority pushed into using it when maybe you don't want to. So then you either have to have a backup plan so you can also pass priority to the next person or let whatever it is resolve, um, or you have to be willing to accept the consequences of, well, I guess I am force of willing this dockside extortionist, for example, um, because if I don't, then we lose the game.
Yeah, uh that's why I don't play blue. Is I keep getting bullied like that. Being the Thrasios player I was for a minute. Yeah, it's a tough situation. I've definitely like kind of figured out some tricks I would like to maybe revisit in the future. Of just like, okay, I revealed a force of will, and if like I'll usually like let like the priority pass around to me once, and afterwards be like, okay, just so y'all know, if you're gonna continue to pass the force of will into me, I'm just gonna keep passing priority unless like it's something that we all agree that we need to take care of, or I know someone else has like backup for my counter spell, or I have backup for my counter spell, or some other thing to supplement it. But I feel like that's usually a good way to kind of like reverse that. Is like if y'all are going to keep doing this, I'm just going to keep throwing the game. It kind of puts it mutually assured destruction a little bit.
Yeah, it's a risky play, but
It's a
but
risky play,
it's
but
a
it.
bluff more or less. Like maybe you'll follow through on it, maybe you won't.
Mhm.
So that's something that your opponents also have to evaluate, and you yourself have to evaluate in a given moment, right?
Yeah, I also
But
I also wouldn't say it's like rule of thumb. It's definitely like contextual, obviously. Like if I
mhm.
know like the Thrasios player is fully online in the control game plan, and there's not like a turbo player between like the threat and like me having revealed that information. Like obviously I will be responsible if I need to be responsible, but if I know that there's more control magic between those 2 points, I'm gonna try and fight. I'm gonna try and challenge it at the very least to not get walked on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, we also mentioned priority there, and that in and of itself is a great political tool
Yeah.
because there are a couple different ways that you can use priority. You can make sure that priority passes each time. Like, okay, you have anything? You have anything? You have anything? All right, I'll counterspell this, or I'll remove that. Or you can be like, all right, guys, I got the answer for this. Don't worry, and jump in there and take it. Right. So that's something. There are different ways to use that priority order, and sometimes it's really advantageous to say, I have the exact perfect answer. I've got this. Nobody else wastes any interaction. Let me do this, and you guys can handle the next one.
I've got the misstep for the Dark Ritual post Nas, guys. Like, this is a clean one for one answer. It's narrow. It's not going to matter for anything else. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's other situations where you think someone else might have a counter spell and you don't want to have to use yours because it can protect your win, so you let the priority pass around, right? There, the general rule of thumb is always make sure priority passes, but when you're playing at a high level politically, sometimes there is a reason to jump priority and say, don't worry about it, I've got this one. I know that I play priority turn order very erratically. I'm commenting all the time on other people while other people have priority, like, oh yeah, you should counter this. Oh, don't, I got this one. Don't worry about it. And and there are certain advantages and disadvantages to that. And there are some tricks about playing priority very erratically that I won't reveal all my secrets on this episode, but there are definitely some tricks you can play to make sure that you bait out your opponent's interaction or whatnot based upon how you play priority, whether that's waiting until the end, waiting until it's your turn, or like trying to read someone and like, okay, well, I don't think this spell loses us the game, and I think it hurts the other person to my left more, so I'm going to pass priority on it. Just different things, different ways to use that game mechanic, even though it's not like a card you're playing. It's something you should be aware of, and you should be trying to maximize your advantage on.
Mm-hmm. As an outsider who I don't think I know many of your tricks, at least as an outsider who things that I've picked up as you noticing is like if there's a game winning spell in the stack, like non-ambiguous, like this spell, if it resolves, will win the game. It's consultation on Thoracle, you know. You are the first to talk. You may not be in the first in priority. You are the first to talk. And at the very least, be like, do you have something? You might be last in priority, but you always ask priority one, do you have something for this?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great tool just to like, because what's the worst? They're gonna say no, pass priority, and you're like, okay, great, we lose. Like I don't have anything either. But like best case scenario, they say, yeah, I have misstep for console. And you're like, okay, fantastic. Let's go ahead and cast that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I never like fully grasped whenever I played Blue. Just because counter spells are so much pressure on me, and I'm so easy to work with that I just get played for everybody's fool. And I'm just like, I get this out of my hands. I'm gonna throw more games than I'm gonna win with these spells.
Yeah, it can be really challenging, especially when, like you said earlier, like the people are the weakest part of any system. Like if you talk about social hacking, Magic is all about social hacking. At least
Very much
CEDH is, because doesn't matter what you say. Yes, it's a card game. Yes, you're playing the cards on the table. But at the end of the day, if you can play the people, you'll win just as many games as you'll lose. You'll have a 50-50 win rate, just the same as if you're playing perfectly every single game. You're gonna have a 25% win rate. So I guess it'd be 25% either way. But my point stands is that if you play the people perfectly or you play the cards perfectly, you're going to win statistically 25% of your games either way. And if you put them together, you're going to increase that win rate even more. So you'll be starting to win even more than 25% of your games. And so I think if you're trying to truly like improve and maximize your political power, that is the thing that you should be focusing on. Is game wins comes from not only tight technical play but also tight social play.
No, 100%. Calling back to our Windows thing, like that's the whole reason why we talked about Windows, is because like if you can politically like maneuver yourself into these situations, your window's going to show up. You're going to be able to make your own window. That's super duper huge. All right, I'm kind of out of topics. Give me like two quick and easy things that we can take away with, because I got at least one, and that's just be willing to talk and be willing to listen to other people. Like if you genuinely think that, hey, this demonic tutor should fetch Toxic Deluge, don't immediately be like, yeah, you're correct, without like a second passing. Be like, okay, why is this person suggesting this? How good is Toxic Deluge? What am I able to do post Deluge, like immediately? Am I just doing board wipe pass? Do I have something else that can follow up? Like, what is the reason I'm being offered this suggestion? As someone who is impressionable, just think it through before going through with it.
Absolutely. I had to pick something for a quick and easy takeaway, is that though it is a card game, I think Commander specifically is first and foremost. It is a social intrigue / grand strategy game. Like while you should be having a significant amount of attention on the cards and focus on playing the cards, playing people can be just as, if not more, effective. And then I guess you wanted two. Well,
Sure.
the second one is probably going to be that along those lines, stemming from that, you can practice political gameplay just like you can practice mechanical gameplay. So the simplest form, you can just start with this one. If you're hearing this episode and you're thinking, well, maybe there's something to this whole politics nonsense. Maybe I'll start trying to implement it into my gameplay. Start with this. You can always ask your opponent to just not do what you don't want them to do. And like, I'd say 20% of the time, they'll be like, yeah, okay, and just not do it. No questions asked. And then 80% of the time, you're gonna be faced with a direct no, I'm not gonna do that. Like I'm casting the spell, and then you have to lay out why they shouldn't cast the spell. But they're like just make the request. Just ask your opponents. Just because the worst thing they can ever do to you is say no, right? So that's the worst thing that can ever possibly happen. So just ask the question, and that will at the very least start a conversation.
I think that's a good one. That I, weirdly enough, sales background is like, I'll just always ask them like, do you want to add fries to this? You know, no, you don't want fries. Cool, we're already at this point anyway. No, I think that's a really good clean one. Just be like, can you please, like, even like joking, like, can you not cast the Drannith Magistrate?
Yeah, just ask, like, what'd you get with that D-tutor? Worst case, they say, haha, he's a funny guy. Good joke. And best case scenario, they're like, oh, I got this. Oh shit, I just told you what I got.
I have been playing my tutors so face up. I will demonic tutor and then be like, everyone will be like, oh, what's he getting? I'm like, I'm gonna cast Dockside and then just like flip a Dockside from my deck. It throws everybody so off. They're like,
sometimes it doesn't matter if they know what you're tutoring for. Sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. All right. That's all I got.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot today.
I think we did. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to what I can only imagine is a hotly expected episode of Mana on the Rocks. It was a good one. I've been liking politics more. It's been something I've been trying to implement more into my game and trying to level up my own gameplay as a player. I feel like that's the next logical step for me, apart from playing a better deck, but that's never going to happen. Atlas, I want to thank you immensely for dispensing your wisdom, my political guru, as it were.
I don't know if I'm a guru per se, but you're welcome.
And then, as always, I want to thank you, our listeners, for just vibing with us. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're doing all right. We'll catch you next time.